All right, I am back with another video today. I'm Alon. I'm one of the hosts of the Comic Boys Media Network. And today, I'm going to have a bit of a different video for you guys. It's not going to be a movie review or a trailer reaction or anything. I'm just going to be today ranking my top three choices. I'm going to make this very short and sweet. I'm going to be ranking my top three choices for who I think should be cast as the next James Bond. For those of you that have been watching this channel for a long time, you guys know that the James Bond movie franchise is one of my favorite action movie, just overall movie franchises, period. It's also one of the biggest ones in Hollywood. And obviously, every time that a James Bond actor has finished his tenure as 007, the rumors start to ramp up. Who's going to be the next James Bond? Who is going to be? When is the movie going to come out? So we have the director. Obviously, it's Denis Villeneuve, the director of Dune, Dune Part 2, Dune Part 3, Sicario, Arrival, Prisoners. He's done a whole bunch of just wonderful films. And I think just the fact that they have Denis Villeneuve directing the film is already great enough. So that's a great start. From my understanding, filming is supposed to start in October of 2026. That's just from rumors that I've heard. And as of April 25th at 8:40 p.m., there are still no news about who's going to be cast as James Bond. There's just been mere speculation about who it's going to be, and people predicting, and the market saying, is it going to be, who's it going to be, this guy, is it going to be that guy, is it going to be him, is it going to be this guy. So yeah, I say a lot to say that this is my official ranking for James Bond. So at 3, I'm going to have a very not so well known actor, and it's going to be Harris Dickinson. Harris Dickinson has played in Blitz. He was in Baby Girl with Nicole Kidman. He was in several other films as well, several big name films too. So, in my opinion, I think Harris Dickinson is the most grounded and emotionally layered option. He brings a very modern kind of screen presence. It's less about dominance and more about internal conflict, restraint, which could be an interesting way to go down this James Bond route. What makes him compelling as a potential James Bond is his ability to feel human in a role that often risks seeing the humanity of James Bond. Obviously, James Bond is very cold. He's a very determined secret agent. Sure, he's a womanizer, although the Daniel Craig one, I'd argue, was the least of the, had the least prominent womanizer trait of all of the James Bonds. Harris Dickinson also has this, he has this natural intensity, and it doesn't rely on him being aggressive. It just comes from his stillness, his facial expressions, the way he performs. And that could be very powerful in a darker, introspective version of James Bond, which seems like the way that they're going. The Daniel Craig James Bond movies were very dark. They got very, very disturbing very quickly. They had the torture scene of Viggo Mortensen's character torturing James Bond. You had sick and twisted villains like Silva and Lucifer Safin and Ernest Blofeld. You had a very dark take on James Bond in the Daniel Craig movies, and I think it was very well received by the audience as well. So when you cast Harris Dickinson as James Bond, think of a Bond who is constantly rethinking what he does rather than just blindly performing the role of a spy. It gives the filmmakers a lot of new room to develop this new persona for James Bond. It's a new take on him. He's 29 years old, 28, 29 years old. He's young, which can make for a very interesting young James Bond, which in my opinion should be the direction that this franchise should be going in. because all the James Bonds that we've seen from what I remember is that they're all dudes in their mid 30s, and they've already started their 007 career. Um, so it's interesting. And also, there's a James Bond game that's coming out next May, and it's going to be about a younger James Bond. So my second option is Callum Turner. He is my second choice. Um, he is obviously like the more traditional Bond pick on this list. He's British. He's got the James Bond look, but it's also with a slight modern edge. In the films that Callum Turner has done, he has this kind of like, I want to say, controlled charisma. He doesn't take over or overpower a scene like all at once and just throw a lot at you. He draws you in slowly. There's calm in his performances that feels very aligned with how Ian Fleming initially imagined James Bond. Um, he feels believable in a tuxedo at a gala or in a close quarters fight. Um, but I think another thing about Callum Turner that's interesting is his subtle, unpredictability. Um, there's a sense that, with his faces and how he looks and, the way he acts, he could switch from charm to violence, and you'd believe both versions too. And that duality is so essential for James Bond because James Bond is this charming guy. He's a womanizer. He charms his way out of things, but also he's violent. He's a brutal dude. He is a trained spy, trained killer, all in one. Um, and that duality is very essential for James Bond. So the only drawback with Callum Turner is that he's older than Harris Dickinson. Um, he's 36 years old, which is on the bit of the older end of it. Sure, when they start filming, if it's this October and they start filming, he'll be 36 or 37, whenever his birthday is. But then you look at the other actors that have been predicted to play the next James Bond, like Henry Cavill, Aaron Taylor Johnson, Idris Elba. Those are all guys as well that are in their early 40s, and Callum Turner is 36, 37. He's getting to the end of his 30s. And so you wonder, like, is he going to be there long term? Because if he's only 36, there's only so much James Bond that he can do because it's very physically taxing. It's a very physically taxing role. The studio would want an actor that would be there for the long run. He would be able to make several films. So the question then becomes age. I think as well that when Daniel Craig was first cast as James Bond, I think he was also in his mid 30s. And then that also becomes an issue where, you can't really do a young, first year James Bond if you do Callum Turner. Maybe you can do it. You can say, oh, Callum Turner is 36, 37, but his character is like 27, 26 or whatever. So that becomes a bit of and that's only if the studio just decides to go in a young James Bond role. So that's my second choice is Callum Turner. And then for my first choice is an actor that I have in the last few months come to respect and admire as a performer quite a bit. And I believe that this actor is the guy to play the role. Me personally, I want him to be the next James Bond. I think it would be great. So number one, and my choice to be James Bond, the wonderful Jacob Elordi. Right? That's controversial. I understand. That's controversial. He's Australian. He's not British. If there's any Australians or British people watching this, please don't kill me. But the Australian and British accents are basically the same. Jacob Elordi can probably do a British accent without an issue. Yeah, it's the most controversial option, but I think it's the most exciting one. Jacob Elordi has done great roles. He was nominated for an Oscar when he played Frankenstein's monster. The Narrow Road to the Deep North is one of the most powerful and impactful historical TV shows I've ever seen, where he plays a Australian prisoner of war. He is great in Euphoria. We're watching Euphoria season 3 right now, and he was great in the first 2 seasons. He was in Saltburn. He was also in the sillier role that he did earlier in his career was The Kissing Booth. But Jacob Elordi brings something that the modern James Bond needs, and every actor needs it, is scale. Jacob Elordi is, what is he, 6'4", 6'5"? He's tall. He's a tall actor, and I think that it could bring an interesting physical, like towering and intimidating physical presence that we haven't seen in other James Bond actors. Daniel Craig was what, 5'10", 5'11", and then the other ones were what, 6 feet, pushing 6'1", 6'2". I'm not sure. Jacob Elordi 6'5". He's a big dude. He's a very big dude. He has a lot of effortless screen dominance. He has that quiet intensity. When he plays Nate Jacobs in Euphoria, that's that quiet intensity that just scares the shit out of you when you look at Nate Jacobs whenever he's in a scene. And he doesn't try at it too hard. It's like it's effortless for him, but he still commands the attention. He's got the chops. Like I said, he got nominated for an Oscar for playing Frankenstein's monster, which was such a emotionally deep role. He played Frankenstein's monster so good, and that was such an emotional film as well. But he has that quiet intimidation, quiet intensity, that look in his eyes, and I see it especially when he plays Nate Jacobs in Euphoria. You can see it, and it just scares the shit out of you. But what makes him interesting too is not just his looks. I think he has the looks to be James Bond, but it's also the difference in how he feels. He can play detached and emotionally unreadable, like Nate Jacobs, like I mentioned. He can also play deeply internal and conflicted when needed, like Dorigo Evans in The Narrow Road to the Deep North, like Frankenstein's monster. And he's played those roles terrific. I think that The Narrow Road to the Deep North and Frankenstein are his two best performances. I think Nate Jacobs is his most interesting character by far. But his best performances for that, deeply internal and issues and emotional conflicts and depth was Dorigo Evans in The Narrow Road to the Deep North and Frankenstein when he played Frankenstein's monster. And then Nate Jacobs was his towering physical presence, his quiet intensity. He's got that stare, when he's looking at somebody like in Euphoria that he doesn't like, when he's looking at Cassie, for example. But the balance is key, actually, for a modern James Bond interpretation. I think that Daniel Craig has set a precedent for James Bond to not make it like cartoonish swagger and, womanizer or something, but it's more like psychological depth. And I think that's why I liked Daniel Craig's James Bond so much, is because of that psychological depth. When you put Jacob Elordi in as James Bond, think of, a James Bond who's always thinking 3 steps ahead, is plotting everything that he wants. Like, say he sees a bad guy or whatever, a henchman, and he gives him that, a stare. He's thinking in his mind like what he wants to do to him, and it's pretty ugly what he wants to do. But to an outsider, you're never sure what he's thinking. Jacob also has a natural cinematic silhouette. He fills an entire frame without needing dialogue. I'm not saying that literally because he's a big fucking dude, but that matters for James Bond. Because look, James Bond isn't just a character. It's not. It's a visual icon. Sure, it's a name too, but it's also a visual icon. The great thing about Jacob Elordi is that he's the youngest between Callum Turner and Harris Dickinson. He's only 28 or something, 27, 28. I'm not sure. So, again, if the studio wants to do young James Bond, Harris Dickinson or Jacob Elordi. You bring them in, you can see their character development from, a rookie James Bond into a more polished, mature, you know, trained one. But also when you have Jacob Elordi, you can have him for several years as James Bond. You can make several movies with him. Because of the fact that he's young, he's going to have that longevity. And if the franchise wants to evolve James Bond into something more emotionally complex and modern, I believe that Jacob Elordi is the most ambitious and visually striking direction that they could take because of the precedent that Daniel Craig was setting with his James Bond, and how emotionally complex he was, and how psychologically oriented that James Bond was. Less of a charmer, less of a womanizer, more emotionally complex and psychological. So those are my three choices for James Bond. When you compare the three of them, Jacob Elordi represents scale, reinvention, a young James Bond, cinematic dominance, that quiet intensity, a towering physical, dominating, intimidating presence. Callum Turner, and I should mention that one is that he's Australian, but then again, an American has been cast as James Bond. It didn't work. Unfortunately, it didn't. But he's Australian. The accent is similar enough to British to a point where he can do it. Callum Turner represents, balance, tradition, and controlled charisma. And then Harris Dickinson represents emotional depth, character evolution, also that same quiet intensity. And what's great about these three guys is that every single one of them is a different direction for James Bond. It's not just a different actor, but they all can literally take the James Bond franchise in their own way. That's what makes this modern casting so interesting, because James Bond isn't just about, who's the best looking, who is the best, dressed, best with women, looks the most right with women, or, holding the signature gun. It's about what direction the franchise wants to move toward for the next decade. If they want to go younger, raw James Bond, Jacob Elordi and Harris Dickinson are great choices. If they want to go, traditional and cast a middle-aged actor like Callum Turner to have that same formula of James Bond, then yeah, Callum Turner is a great choice as well. The real question is, who should be the next James Bond? It's what kind of James Bond do we want next? Do we want a younger one? Do we want a middle-aged one who's already pretty well into his career? Because depending on the answer and depending on what the studio wants, all three actors can make sense, just depending on what Denis Villeneuve wants, what Amazon wants. But for me, like I mentioned, the most exciting vision, and me personally, the one I want to play the next James Bond, 100%, Jacob Elordi. He has been crushing it in his movies lately. He's very impressive. He's very talented. I think he could be a spectacular James Bond. Also, for the sake of his, not for the sake of, but with regards to his career, he hasn't really done action movies that often. He does have one action movie coming out this August called The Dog Stars, in which I'm not even sure he's going to have that many action sequences in it. But, all the other films he's done were very different to James Bond. So this could be a great role for him. And he would be an absolute idiot to turn it down if Amazon offered it to him. Yeah, okay. So that's going to do it for my James Bond casting. Thank you guys for watching. Like, subscribe, comment, hit the notification bell button so you don't miss an upload, and I'll see you guys soon.